Many Brits are familiar with the phrase Sweet Fanny Adams. The saying has been used for over a century and is nowadays often shortened to Sweet FA, meaning nothing or something worthless. The FA also being swapped out for words that make a similar point. Over the decades, the phrase has lived longer in our collective memories than the gruesome case that spawned it. So who was the real Fanny Adams, and why is her name still used over 150 years after her death? Today, we'll find out. It was April 30th, 1859 when Fanny Adams was born to George and Harriet Adams. She was a middle child with 5 siblings, 3 sisters and 2 brothers. The family lived here in this small market town. This is Alton in Hampshire, and is still today has a small population of just under 18,000. Back then, however, there would have been far fewer people here, but make no mistake, every resident would have been very familiar with everyone else who lived here. Fanny and her family lived here, Tanhouse Lane, her immediate next door neighbours being her grandparents, another close neighbour being her best friend, Minnie Warner. The girls, of course, spending much of their time together. The town of Alton has a long history with beer production, and it's here in this meadow at the end of Tanhouse Lane that back then would have been surrounded by fields all producing hops for the brewery that Fanny, her siblings and her best friend Minnie would often be found playing. By those who knew her, Fanny was described as a tall, comely and intelligent child who always looked happy and loved talking with people. Whenever possible, the little girl stopped to have a conversation with those living in her town. In 1867, Fanny Adams was a fun-loving 8-year-old girl living a simple but comfortable childhood in a safe community, having no worries about tomorrow. Sadly, that all changed one hot and stifling Saturday. That day, August 24th, 1867, seemed like any other day in Alton. Fanny was playing with Minnie as usual, along with her 5-year-old sister, Lizzie. The trio had been spending most of their morning in the Adams garden, but eventually wanted to change the scenery. And so Fanny asked her mother, Harriet, for permission to go to play in the nearby flood meadow. Harriet, who was busy with housework that day, did not have any reason not to let the girls go. After all, Fanny and her friends and siblings had been playing in the fields and meadows numerous times before without problems. Everyone in the town looked out for each other, and the fields were a short distance away, so what's the worst that could happen? And so Fanny and her sister Lizzie and Minnie set off for the flood meadow. As they made their way in, the 3 girls were suddenly approached by a man dressed in a black frock coat, light waistcoat and trousers, and a tall hat. The man in question had lived in the town for just 2 months or so, but Fanny and the other 2 girls already knew him from church. He was 29-year-old Frederick Baker. As the girls believed Frederick to be a respectable man, they did not mind stopping and having a chat with him. However, after some time, Frederick made a rather strange proposal. He asked if Fanny would accompany him on the walk to the neighbouring village of Sheldon. Understandably, Fanny wanted to stay with her little sister and her friend, so she refused. Not taking no as an answer, Frederick then offered her 1/2 penny if the young girl would walk with him, but again, Fanny refused. At this point, Baker turned his attention to Minnie and Lizzie, to whom he now offered 3 halfpennies to go and buy some sweets. However, they were determined to stay together with Fanny. Realizing he was not able to trick the girls with money, Frederick forgot persuasion altogether and just used the evident advantage he had over the girls, his size and strength. And so Frederick picked the helpless Fanny up and carried her away, quickly disappearing into the hops fields, leaving Minnie and Lizzie in disbelief at what had just happened. Not knowing what to do, the two girls ran as fast as they could to Minnie's house to tell the story to Minnie's mother, Martha Warner. However, her reaction was not as you would expect. There had been no crime in Alton and Martha's lifetime, let alone child abduction. So obviously, her daughter was just joking around or playing some sort of game. Seeing her mother's calm reaction, Minnie herself eventually came to the conclusion that Fanny was safe with Frederick after all. They had just been worried for nothing. And so she and Lizzie went back outside to play in the Warner garden until Lizzie had to head back home for dinner at around 5 p.m. At this point, Fanny had been gone for more than 3 hours. On her way home, Lizzie met one of the family neighbours, Mrs. Gardner, who immediately asked the little girl where she had left her sister. As Lizzie told the story of what happened earlier, Mrs. Gardner immediately knew something was terribly wrong. She took Lizzie back home as quickly as she could, where the 5-year-old finally shared the information with her and Fanny's mother. Harriet could not believe what she heard. A man had forcibly taken her daughter. Extremely worried, Harriet and Mrs. Gardner went out in search of Fanny. While there were no signs of the 8-year-old, they quickly came across somebody else, Frederick Baker. He was alone. Knowing that this man had been the last person to see Fanny, Mrs. Gardner asked bluntly what Frederick had done with the girl, to which he answered, claiming he had simply given her some money for sweets and left her at the gate of the town. Mrs. Gardner and Harriet didn't believe a word Frederick had said, with Mrs. Gardner stating, "I have a great mind to give you in charge of the police." Baker replied, telling her she could do what she liked. As a solicitor's clerk, Baker felt his social standing could easily deflect any accusations made by the two women. As they had only the children's story to go by, the pair returned to Adam's home in the hope that Fanny would return unharmed. As hours began to pass with no sign of the little girl returning home, a search party was put together. Several neighbours and other townspeople, in addition to Harriet, followed the same route the three girls had taken earlier that day. They searched the hollow, a lane between the hops fields, but Fanny was not there. Next, they went through the fields themselves, but again, no sign of the 8-year-old. That was until labourer Thomas Gates, a veteran of the Crimean War, came across a scene as gruesome as any he had seen on the battlefield. In one of the fields there lay, perched atop 2 hop poles, the severed and mutilated head of a child. Hearing the news, Harriet became frantic. In a town that small, it was not possible the head belonged to anybody other than her daughter. It had to be Fanny. Heartbroken, Harriet tried to run to her husband, who at that time was playing cricket. But on her way there, she collapsed, overpowered by grief and exhaustion. Still, the news of Fanny's death found George, who immediately returned home, took his shotgun and headed out with the intention to find the person who had done this to his daughter. His family and neighbours were able to disarm him and calm him down enough to prevent him from doing anything irrevocable. When the details of what had happened to Fanny began to be revealed, nobody could really blame George for wanting to take the law into his own hands. After searching the fields where Fanny's head had been found, police were left with a package labelled "Portions of a Child." There was no doubt they were investigating the most brutal crime in the living memory of the town. It would take several days before all the parts of Fanny's body were finally recovered. They were initially brought here, which back then would be the Leathern Bottle Public House. Thereafter they were taken to the local police station, where the body was reassembled. By then, of course, her killer had already been apprehended. After the discovery of Fanny's remains on August 24th, the police had gone to Frederick Baker's office around 9 p.m. based on the eyewitness accounts. Of course, Frederick protested at first, claiming he was innocent, but as there were no other suspects, he was arrested then and there. At the station, police found 2 small, unstained knives in Frederick's possession, in addition to bloodstains on his shirt and trousers. At this point, the case against Frederick Baker looked already quite solid. But the final nail in the coffin was found the following day. While searching the solicitor's office, somewhere hidden in Frederick's desk, the police found a diary. It contained a chilling entry. 24th of August, Saturday, killed a young girl. It was fine and hot. 3 days after Fanny's death, the inquest was held here, which was then the Duke's Head Inn. That was under the Deputy Coroner for Hampshire, as required by English law at the time. It was concluded that Fanny died between 1:30 and 3:30 p.m, although her cause of death was now impossible to say with any certainty. As such, Fanny Adams' death certificate simply states the cause of death as being injuries inflicted by Frederick Baker. Murder. During this initial inquest, Mrs. Gardner, Fanny's mother, Harriet and Minnie Warner were asked to give details of their story. Baker remained unfazed and even corrected Minnie by stating he had given them 3 halfpence instead of 2. The inquest found Baker responsible for the murder, but the trial still had to occur, and so it began at Winchester Assizes on December the 5th, 1867. Throughout his time in court, Frederick remained calm and collected, denying he had anything to do with the murder of the 8-year-old. Yet his defence tried the criminally insane angle, as Frederick's family had a history of mental illness. In the end, the court decided that there was no evidence to support the claim. But there was more than enough evidence against Frederick, including a new eyewitness. A young boy had come forward saying he had seen Frederick on the day of Fanny's death, covered in blood, washing his hands and 2 small objects down the river. There were not many questions left at this point. And so, after just 15 minutes of deliberation, Frederick Baker was found guilty by the jury of the murder of Fanny Adams. He was sentenced to death by hanging. It is reported that before his death, Frederick wrote a letter to Harriet and George Adams, expressing his remorse and seeking their forgiveness. On Christmas Eve, 1867, Frederick Baker was hanged at the Winchester jail in front of over 5,000 people, the majority of which were women and children. Little Fanny Adams was laid to rest at Alton Cemetery, located near her home. Her headstone was erected by voluntary subscription, as townspeople were determined not to let Fanny's story be forgotten. However, nobody back then could have guessed the name of the brutally murdered girl would eventually morph into a phrase still used today. The originators of the term Sweet Fanny Adams were sailors in the British Royal Navy who came to use the expression to refer to their newly issued rations of tinned mutton. They likened this unpleasant tinned meat to Fanny Adams' remains, and over time the term Sweet Fanny Adams became slang for poor meat, scarce leftovers, and eventually nothing or things without worth. This phrase and its meaning is in stark contrast to the life of the bright and friendly Fanny Adams, whose life was tragically stolen on that fateful summer's day in 1867. So how do you feel about the phrase? Do you think we should stop using it? Or do you think its use has helped Fanny's story persist all these years later? Let us know in the comments box below. Right then, take care, and I'll see you next time with another story to make you say, well, I never.